Sorry, I forgot to mention this while I was actually editing the video, but I also have timestamps down below in case there's any specific thing you guys are needing to check out. So on the topic of performance upgrades that you can do to your computer, one thing that many people never ever do is update their graphics drivers, which means going into your NVIDIA or AMD graphics settings and updating the drivers that they're running off of, which can fix a lot of bugs, frame drops, and other issues that you might be having, such as taking forever to load into games or rendering stuff incorrectly, frame drops like I already mentioned. So here is going to be how to do that. So I'm going to show you how to do it with NVIDIA because that's what my computer runs, and it should be pretty similar to AMD, but I'm not entirely sure what the app is for AMD. But for NVIDIA, you're just going to go to the GeForce Experience app. If you don't see it, then you're just going to type GeForce Experience and press open. When you're in the app, it'll show you a list of games you might have, and you will need to make an account for it if you do not already have one. Once you have the account, go up to the top left here, press drivers, and you might have some installations to do for your graphics drivers. Now if it's ready, then it'll show that your current drivers are currently installed, but as you can see here, I have an update to do because they released an update today. So the easiest way to do this is just to go express installation, and basically what that'll do is it'll prepare for install. You're going to need to run an admin code because this will be changing the graphics drivers that your computer functions off of. And when you're updating this, your displays, your monitors, they might flicker a little bit, they might turn off and on while the drivers are updating. That's perfectly normal. Do not worry if that happens, because it's likely because that the monitors themselves are being powered by your graphics card, and in order to update them, it needs to refresh the monitors. Another thing that a lot of PC players don't ever do is actually change their settings to actually get the FPS they want. Now some people might have a 240 Hz monitor and still be playing on 60 FPS the whole time, and that's because they don't go into their actual settings and change the settings. So the first thing you want to go to do is, when you go into your home, it might be here under display, but if you can't find it, it should be under system, display, or you can just search for it. Once you're under the display settings, you can go down here to advanced display, and right on here on the bottom, or at the top, you'll choose the monitor you want to connect with and choose a refresh rate that is the highest one that you have. Now keep in mind, the higher it is, the more power it'll be taking from the graphics card, and the more power your devices will be using altogether. As you can see here, they also have specific report for FORTNITE Chapter 5 with this specific driver update, especially for LEGO Fortnite, Rocket Racing, and the Fortnite Festival. And that is actually just great, what we needed. So if anybody's having FPS issues in those 3 game modes, or just in the Chapter 5 map in general, that's probably why you might want this update, because it's actually probably going to be much better now, so that's awesome. Now, as far as settings that can help your guys' FPS, we also can go to the graphics settings. I know the UI looks a little funky now that they have it updated, but here are some settings I think you should try. For one, keep your game on full screen, as this makes it so that your GPU only has to process the frames for one application. The resolution should match whatever your monitor resolution is. In my case, that's 1920 by 1080. VSync should be disabled, as it really is just pretty annoying and uses more resources on your PC than needed. Rendering mode should either be DirectX 12 or Performance. Performance mode has been looking a little weird lately, which is why I don't have it on, and I also use DirectX 12 for the better graphics. But if you just want pure performance, performance works fine. All this stuff doesn't matter, but I would prefer to have motion blur off. That's honestly completely preference and doesn't usually affect performance. Now, as far as the presets, if you have an NVIDIA RTX GPU, then you should be able to have this NVIDIA DLSS anti-aliasing setting, which is actually really good. Now, typically without any anti-aliasing and having your settings at 66% resolution, this is what your game would look like. Notice it's a little fuzzy, right? You can notice it more if I'm doing like an emote or something. You can see how it's a bit fuzzy around the character, right? With DLSS, it uses AI technology to actually combine the frames to each other, and that actually makes it so that it's a lot more smooth of an image, as you can see now. But if you have an older version of an NVIDIA card, or you're using an AMD card, there is no current anti-aliasing setting for those cards specifically, except for the in-game ones, in which case, if you're going for an anti-aliasing setting that has performance values, I would recommend FXAA. TAA is alright. but FXAA is typically better for performance. And then TSR is really good anti-aliasing, but can be pretty beefy on those frames. So it really depends on how good your PC is. Dynamic 3D resolution is also a great option if you're not going to be using NVIDIA DLSS. Nanite virtualized geometry makes the game look amazing, but it very much can lower frame rate. It is specified in these descriptions here. A lot of these may say that it will lower performance, but this specifically says lower frame rate. Nanite is a very beefy thing to have on graphics, so if your computer can handle it and you just are wanting to show off your amazing graphics, go ahead. But if you're going for the performance or even just quality of playing the game, I recommend leaving this off. Your game can still look good without it. So a lot of people might have been noticing frame drops, especially while sprinting or sliding or something like that, in both Fortnite OG and now in Chapter 5. I have noticed that it's not really a problem when all of your settings are either set to low, medium, high, or ultra, but all of them have to be set to that. You can't just have some on some. Now, I usually do have some on some, but I don't have a problem with the FPS drops. When I do, it always goes away when I have the settings at the same. So that's one thing you can try, but you know, it might not always fix the problem. Now, as far as actually making your game look good, having all these settings on epic would be great, but they're not all necessary, and I'm going to explain which ones actually are really good. So obviously Nanite is really, you can see a difference between the gameplay in Nanite, but it does lower the frames tremendously, so I don't usually use this. Shadows doesn't actually mean like how good or high detailed the shadows are unless you're using them with Nanite. But what it actually does is mostly just the distance that shadows render in from. So looking at an object 50 meters away might have shadows, but looking at an object 75 meters away might not. So those settings just show how far away the shadows render in from. Global illumination and reflections are just lighting options that are really good if you're trying to play on high graphics, but it's not even going to do much if you don't have shadows on, so don't worry about that if you're playing with shadows off. View distance is pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to get into that. However, I will say that on DirectX 12, having them on near does actually act like you're playing on low meshes, just like you would in performance mode. And I actually prefer that because the builds just look much cleaner in my mind when you're trying to, build fight and stuff. So I like to have my view distance on near a lot. But if I want the competitive advantage of a high view distance, I would go onto performance mode for that. Textures are really detailed in some games, but if you turn your settings from low to epic textures in Fortnite in-game, you will notice almost zero difference, so I usually leave that on low. Effects and post-processing are very heavily noticeable. Like, you can really see them. The post-processing kind of is like the coloring and shading, the quality of that, and that's really good. That's literally basically where your graphics are coming from. And then of course the effects just look much cleaner the higher they are. So basically those are the settings that you want for the, depending on your FPS, the lower they are, better frames you'll get, and those are also some other settings that you could get to increase your frames. I hope that clears things up for you guys.